So Kerry, maybe you can give us your oversights into abortion in the UK and beyond, and what things we need to know. So thank you very much, Kerry.
Thanks very much, Tina. Thanks for inviting me, and also thanks to the other speakers. Sounds like it's going to be a good meeting. So I'm Kerry. I'm the chair of Abortion Rights. We campaign in England, Scotland, and Wales. So we're the product of a merger between the Abortion Law Reform Association that was formed in the 1930s and the National Abortion Campaign that started in the 1970s. So the Abortion Law Reform Association were responsible for bringing in the 1967 Abortion Act, and then it almost immediately needed defending, and NAC set themselves up, and they were sort of grassroots campaign. So I feel very much like we're the sort of product of two types of campaigning, and I am standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm going to talk a little bit about Roe v Wade, but also what our law is in Britain. Just to say, in 1967, when they were celebrating getting the 1967 Abortion Act through, the chair of ALRA, Diane Munday, she tells a story where she would only let them toast with half glasses of champagne because they hadn't finished the whole job. The 1967 Act allows abortion in certain circumstances, mainly if the physical or mental health of the woman is affected, if the gestation is below 24 weeks, and if two doctors sign off on it. So essentially, the doctors have control, they're gatekeeping abortion, and she believed that women should have control. So we still haven't decriminalised abortion 50 years later, and we're working off a piece of legislation. It's still in the criminal code. We're working off a piece of legislation, the Offences Against the Person Act, which was signed in when Queen Victoria was on the throne in 1861. And if you think that that's just an act, that's just an old piece of legislation that we don't use anymore, it is currently being used. There was a court case today using the Offences Against the Person Act to prosecute a woman for an abortion in very difficult circumstances. She was taken from her hospital ward into police custody and stayed there for 36 hours. And it's a really scary case, and sort of highlights to me exactly why we do need to decriminalise abortion legislation. Northern Ireland has decriminalised it, partly because they never had the Abortion Act. So for 50 years they had this kind of complete ban on abortion, but we still have some concerns about the underfunding of abortion care in Northern Ireland. We're a grassroots campaign with affiliates. We have local branches, regions, and national branches. We don't have any other funding other than our individual and affiliate members. So at the end of this, I'm going to add a bunch of links for people to check out and see how they can get involved. But I wanted to take this up. This is an extremely timely meeting, so I wanted to talk about last month's Supreme Court announcement that they're rolling back Roe v Wade. And you may have come on some of our protests over the last few months, but if you want a quick update, it is pretty complicated, so I'm happy to kind of whiz through it. They announced their outcome of one of the most important cases on reproductive rights in decades. The Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is the last remaining abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi, challenged state law that would ban abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, including in the cases of rape and incest. And the Supreme Court decided not just the fate of their clinic, but of the monumental 1973 ruling Roe v Wade, which legalized abortion nationwide. And it legalized it on the basis of privacy. We got to this stage because the Trump administration had stacked the Supreme Court with right-wing anti-choice appointments, and the Republican Party had been laying the ground leading up to this for decades by putting people in place in the lower courts. And there was, if we're honest, complacency from the pro-choice side. I feel like it is racially motivated by a desire to change the demographics, or a sort of scaremongering around the demographics of the US, where there is a trend moving away from a white majority because of immigrant labour and lower birth rates. So this is where we are. Nevertheless, there is a huge fight going on, and thousands of activists turned up on the steps of the Supreme Court within hours of the ruling being announced and the leak in May. But I think the mood is very dark. We held a meeting with US activists last month, and they are overwhelmed, to say the least. It was a really raw and powerful meeting, and there were tears. We know that the population of the US, pretty much 66% is in favor of a women's right to choose. So we know this is unpopular, but I guess the Supreme Court, out of its all-time 114 ever appointees, only 6 have been anything other than white men. And so I think that it's not necessarily a surprise that they're out of step with public sentiment. It's a huge, significant step for abortion rights, but also women's liberation, not just in the US, but it has emboldened anti-abortion activists here. And then also, I'm going to talk a little bit about Poland, because they've got a dire situation as well. And I want to talk about why, when action happens in the US, why we have to care about it here. The US case undermines the right to privacy, it makes access more difficult, and it puts abortion funding out of reach, so it will impact poorer and marginalised women more, and will encourage yet more anti-abortion legislation and action. I've said publicly, I just think, if you compare this ruling with the inaction on gun control, it shows it isn't about being pro-life, it's about controlling and policing our bodies. And so Abortion Rights wants to commit to solidarity work, but we also want to say squarely that we won't take any rollbacks here either. So just quickly, why should we care what's going on in the US or Poland or anywhere else? The anti-choice, let's be, true about it. The anti-choice crew is numerically small, and even in the sort of religious organisations that they operate on, they're on the fringes of those religious groups. But they're organised, they're well funded, and they link up globally. So we have to organise and link up globally. We know that they're emboldened in the US after the Texas ban happened last year. We had a counter protest at the Antis March for Life, and they were in buoyant mood. In January, there were 3 anti-choice amendments added to the Health and Care Bill heard in Parliament, and even on the day where the government was in complete chaos and cabinet members were resigning left, right and centre, and Boris had to throw in the towel, Nadine Dorries still took the time to trash the abortion time limit and say she thought it should be lower. So I wanted to say to you clearly, there's no room for complacency. I think we have to meet their protests with counter protests. We have to organise letters to MPs, and we have to make sure our supporters are armed with the facts and the arguments to make the case effectively to politicians, policymakers, our colleagues, our friends, everyone. Abortion Rights is a campaign that coordinates this activity, but we can't do it on our own, and we need our supporters to take action. And it's important that we learn lessons where we can too. Complacency is a really important habit to break. We don't want to just appear on the back foot when there's a threat. We want to make the case for progressive abortion care that focuses on the needs of women and pregnant people who have specific needs, for abortion access that isn't dictated by a postcode lottery or funding of a compromised healthcare system. So we have to argue against austerity. We have to promote the NHS for good quality training for future doctors and healthcare professionals, and for better access to abortion care, including for working class communities, migrants, and whoever the latest scapegoat is. There seems to be, worldwide, there seems to be 2 trends. So there's, I don't know if you saw a lot of green, you've seen a lot of green with the protesters. The green scarf activists in Argentina came back after, I think they had 5 cases where they were knocked back, but they were a successful feminist grassroots campaign, and they won abortion legislation in Argentina a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And they seem to have spread a bit like a rash around Mexico. Mexico is legalizing abortion, and also in Colombia. And this kind of grassroots feminist movement is contrasted with the backward kind of rollbacks of the US and in Poland. In Poland, there's also a case of a woman who gave the victim of a domestic violence abortion pills, and she is up against the courts at the moment, and they keep giving her court dates, and then the witnesses aren't turning up and they cancel it. And I really feel like there's sort of cat and mouse game going on with the Justyna case in Poland. Date for your diaries. We'll be coordinating a counter March for Choice protest on the 3rd of September when the anti-choice March for Life gathers in London. So please look out for publicity and join the counter protests with your placards and flags. I want to finish finally with, I want to say that campaigning should be joyous. We can build our campaign in positive and creative ways. And last year, our sister organisation activist of Alliance for Choice, Emma Campbell, is part of a Northern Ireland art collective called Array Collective, and they won the 2021 Turner Prize. And they're talented, funny, unapologetically political, and they respond unflinchingly to issues like abortion, mental health, and queer liberation. So we can have nice things, and we can campaign for this. We have to work hard, and we can't be complacent. But I wanted to end on that note. I'm going to put some links in the chat, and I'm really happy to answer questions.
That was great, Kerry. Thank you so much. And really good to know we have a date for the diaries already, the 3rd of September. There'll certainly be questions later on about all that, and we'll find out what we can do as Green Party women to support you in the actions you're taking in the UK. Thank you very much. And for everybody with questions for Kerry, after we've had the 3rd speaker, we'll do questions for everyone. So maybe note them now. We're now going to go across to Harriet Clugston. So Harriet is done some investigative work, and it's been quite worrying, I think, Harriet. I was quite distressed to read about it, and certainly facing an 1861 law wasn't something I expected to read up on and find was still happening now. So just to reintroduce Harriet, she's a multi-award winning data and investigative journalist who was shortlisted for the Paul Foot Award in 2021. She's data investigations editor at National World, and recently broke a story of women being investigated by the police over attempting to terminate their own pregnancies. Harriet, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. Hello, yes, I'm Harriet. I just wanted to start off by saying that, I'm a data journalist, and inevitably a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is statistics and figures. But obviously, it's that, as the old saying goes, these are not just statistics, these are real women whose lives are being affected by this. And just in the last 5 days, I've been in 2 courts, one in Oxford and one in Staffordshire, watching 2 separate women being prosecuted under these laws. And I think, it's just a really sad state of affairs. Particularly, against the picture in America. And I think that, no matter what your opinion on late-term abortions, or even if you don't believe in full decriminalisation, I think that at the very least, what we would need is modern, unambiguous and proportionate laws that are fit for the current era in this country, which I don't think the current laws are. So yeah, as Tina said, the story that got me invited here today was concerning some data that I'd got hold of, which showed that in the last 8 years, 17 women in England and Wales had been investigated by police on suspicion of procuring illegal abortions. There are 2 pieces of legislation that are relevant to my investigation. So there's the first one, as we've heard about already, is the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act. And the language used around that offence is procuring an illegal abortion. There's a second piece of legislation brought in 1929, which is the Infant Life Preservation Act, and that the crime under that is called intentional destruction of a viable unborn child, and that probably applies to abortion scenarios as well. That's only supposed to cover pregnancies of at least 28 weeks. However, the woman who's in court today in Staffordshire, she's being charged under that 1929 Act, and according to the summary of charges read aloud in court today, she took an abortion pill at 26 weeks. Now, whether that's just an inaccurate summary being given in court, I'm not sure, but I think it's something to watch with interest. I wanted to sort of start just raising a story that was published in the Sunday Times at the weekend, just because I'm sure many people here might have read that, and that stated that 52 women had been reported to the police for abortion offences since 2015, and that there'd been an increase in recent years. And my intention is not to sort of like call out a mistake here. It's just that those figures directly contradict the ones that I'm here to talk about. So I think I just do have to address it. So just to say that those figures aren't entirely accurate, and that article has been updated now, and I've shared with them the data that I'm here to speak about. But I think that the mistake that the data journalists at the Times have fallen into is actually just a really good reflection of some of the problems with the legislation, which I'll go through in a moment. So basically how I arrived into this investigation, well, I started with the data that the Sunday Times have used a few months ago. I think when we had the sort of first inclination that the Supreme Court in America was going to overturn Roe V Wade. The data is a big database the Home Office maintains on police recorded crime, which is updated every 3 months. And what these figures show is the official crimes that police forces have recorded and then submitted centrally. So I'd like to stress, first of all, that this will not necessarily capture all of the cases that police have ever dealt with, because I think the way that I understand the process is that you have a police report or a referral which generates an incident that's assigned to an investigating officer, and they'll determine if an actual crime has taken place, and then the crime is recorded. So there could be sort of cases that are not being captured in this. It's something that I don't know. Yeah, as I say, a few months ago, I had a look in this database to sort of have a look at what I could see about the abortion offences in this country. And this is when I saw the 52 cases of procuring illegal abortion that were included in there. So that's between March 2014 and December 2021. And I started initially by thinking those are figures that I would report on. However, I subsequently went to look at a separate database from the Ministry of Justice, which covers the courts, so the prosecutions. And that data provides a sex breakdown of the suspect. And you can see when you look at the Ministry of Justice data that I think it was almost all of the cases that until now had been prosecuted actually involved men rather than women. Which sort of struck me as surprising at first, but I think it's one aspect that is a problem with the legislation, which is that there's no distinction whatsoever made between an expectant, a pregnant woman trying to end her own pregnancy, and anybody else who is sort of, assisting in that process or working in the illicit abortion trade. They're all treated the same, which in a way is slightly more harsher than some anti-abortion laws around the world, which maybe criminalise like the abortion providers more than they do the woman. So if you have a look at sort of examples of some people have been prosecuted before, it might be people sort of selling unregulated medicines and that kind of thing. Basically, the Home Office data doesn't have that sex breakdown. So I didn't want to report on those figures, first of all, because, the resultant story, it could easily be dismissed, sort of saying, well, we don't even know if these are pregnant women, to start with. So the initial step in the investigation was to submit a Freedom of Information request to the Home Office, asking for new data to be provided with the figures broken down by the sex of the suspect. And that actually arrived back the day before Roe v Wade was overturned in the US. And these figures confirmed that there were at least 17 investigations over procuring an illegal abortion, as well as 15 cases of intentional destruction of a viable unborn child, which involved female suspects during that time period. The problem is this still doesn't tell us that these definitely were women and girls who ended or attempted to end their own pregnancies, but it's certainly a lot closer than what was discernible from the publicly available data at first. And we also had a breakdown provided of the subsection of the crimes, and we could see that the majority of women had been investigated over procuring abortions rather than like procuring the pill that could be used in an abortion. So it certainly seems like these are women who are being investigated on suspicion of ending their own pregnancies. There are a number of reasons, though, why we think that this is likely an underestimate. One of which is that a number of police forces can't provide data for that entire time period, so there's likely to be cases that have been missed there. But most importantly, there's the fact that a large chunk of the crimes, they haven't recorded the sex of the suspect at all. So, as I said, there were 17 illegal abortion crimes involving females, 13 involving males, and 21 where the sex wasn't known. And then for the child destruction cases, 15 with females, 28 with males, and 36 with an unknown suspect. So what we did was take the cases where there was a known sex and work out the proportion that were women, And then we applied that same proportion to all the cases where the sex wasn't known to sort of arrive at an estimate of what we think the true number might be, which we make 29 and 28 respectively for those two crimes. So that's a total of 57 over 8 years, although that's obviously, it's speculative at this stage. But since I first published that story, which will be the first in a sort of longer term investigation, I've been able to establish that there are at least another 7 procuring an abortion cases and another 9 child destruction cases that involve female suspects. So that brings the known totals to 24 instead of 17. Actually, sorry, 24 for both of the crimes, up from 17 and 15. And I'm only in the very, very early stages of that part of the investigation. So I expect that that number is going to go up and up as I sort of gather more data. I just wanted to raise a couple of other issues that I've noticed with the legislation, just like as a journalist trying to cover it, and obviously I'm not a legal expert, but as far as I can make out, one problem is that the breadth of the legislation that we've got means that there are a lot of different scenarios that can fall under this legislation. So we've got, as I say, women trying to end their own pregnancies. We've got people who might assist them, like, a mother trying to buy abortion pills for her daughter. You've got the people who might be sort of like trading in pills or providing abortions and that kind of thing. But then finally, you've got people who assault pregnant women and cause them to lose their pregnancy, and that can be treated in exactly the same way as a woman aborting her pregnancy. So I think I assumed at first that that final scenario might be more relevant to child destruction law, which is why I sort of focused on procuring an abortion myself. But I think that really, when you look at the legislation, because it's so old, both of them overlap. They're very, very ambiguous. They're very, very broad. I think there's no rhyme nor reason as to which one could be used in which scenario. So it just sort of further complicates the matter, not just from a data perspective, but just from being able to sort of really get an accurate, insightful picture on what is truly going on in the criminal justice system in this country, which, I think ideally we'd be able to sort of have that clarity. And yeah, I'd just like to mention one other aspect of my article, which was obviously we've covered the statistics, but I spoke to a man called Dr. Jonathan Lord, who's an NHS gynecologist. He's also medical director of a charity and abortion provider called MSI Reproductive Choices. And he's painted quite a disturbing picture about police forces basically approaching their charity and trying to force them to share personal medical information of women that they've cared for or sort of spoken with at any point, and even trying to compel them. And in one scenario, they were only able to avoid divulging personal medical information by sort of going to a coroner directly. And he's outlined 2 case studies that he's personally aware of in which police officers have been called to hospitals when 2 women have suffered miscarriages without any sort of face of it evidence that they've done something themselves, other than the fact that they've been honest and said that at some point they've approached this abortion provider to talk about their options, which seems reasonable that anyone in that situation would do. One of those was a 15-year-old girl, and this was during lockdown. Both of them have had their digital devices confiscated for digital strip searches, leaving them isolated from friends and family during lockdown, and after having suffered an unexpected pregnancy loss, really compounding the trauma there. So yeah, I think basically, just from what I've seen so far, as I say, in early stages, there are sort of dark aspects, I think, to the way in which this legislation is being used in the UK. It's certainly not sort of for the birds as something that doesn't really apply in real life scenarios.
Harriet, can I ask you a quick question about, in your research, have you discovered that this is currently, the fact that someone goes in having a miscarriage and the police turn up because maybe you once asked an advisor about an abortion, is that something new? Is this always been ongoing? Is there a surge in that happening? And is there any pattern to this, or?
As far as I can tell, this is something that hasn't been looked into before, which obviously is something I intend to put right. But I've not seen people speaking about this before. I don't know whether it's a new scenario or not. It possibly is just something in the digital age, when they know that they can confiscate your phone and sort of look through Google searches to see if you've searched abortion providers, which is not evidence of a crime, in the first place. But that's the kind of thing that they're doing. And
is there an obligation on medical staff at all to inform the authorities?
I don't believe
miscarriage comes in.
I don't believe there's an obligation, but in certain scenarios, they are doing.
Right. Wow, that was a heck of a journey, Harriet. Thank you very much. And what a mess to untangle. It's like, wool. It's just all tangled together as to and to still be using those 1861 laws. The one that I think it's the same law that says you'd be punished the same as if you starved your servants. I mean, it's just ludicrous, isn't it?
I think this is, the Law Society, as I understand it, have been, over the last several years, been sort of reappraising this piece of legislation, trying to rewrite new laws fit for the modern world, and they've just decided to ignore the abortion aspect of it. So that's just sort of not got the sort of fresh look that other laws in that piece of legislation have.
Right. Stay with us to the questions at the end, because I'm sure there'll be plenty more for you, Harriet. Thank you so much. Now we're going to go across to our Green Party spokesperson on health, social care and public health. She's also a GP and she's with the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. And it's my pleasure to introduce Pallavi Devulapalli. And I'm never going to get it right because I'm just terrible with names.
Don't worry, that's okay. It's a long name. It's Pallavi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here among so many intelligent women. And you're all intelligent because you're in this conference. It's a kind of, it's a given. So I'm a jobbing GP. I just want to correct one thing, not correct, but just want to point out this question that you just asked, Harriet, about medical providers. I would have thought, as a medical professional myself, that we actually have an obligation not to provide such details. We should not be divulging patients' details.
It kind of feels a bit like a priest thing, isn't it? You kind of expect there to be that confidentiality.
Absolutely, and that's, we're very, very cagey about divulging details to anyone. Obviously, we do when we feel it's in the patient's interest, but that's the only time when we will ever override it. And even there, for the vast majority of times, we will inform the patient before doing so. So, this is, they really shouldn't be. And they're going against their medical code if they are. So just want to pick up on that.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So I just want to I just want to mention a few facts. I know we're all aware, but just to refresh myself, I went through kind of what the figures are. And I just want to point out that abortions happen, whether they're legal or not. Restricting access to abortion does not prevent people from seeking an abortion. 68% of unintended pregnancies end in an abortion, even in countries that completely prohibit abortion. So essentially, by making abortion difficult or illegal, all we're doing is driving them underground and making them unsafe. In countries where abortion is restricted or illegal, only 1 in 4 abortions are safe. Contrast that with countries like UK, where 9 in 10 abortions are safe. So there's a health risk. It is a health issue. So abortion is a healthcare issue. And I'm just shocked by one of the comments that came up in the chat, where somebody said their MP didn't believe in the autonomy of women, to make decisions. I think that was Gillian who put that in the chat, and the MP was Danny Kruger, I'm going to name and shame. And I think this kind of gets to the nub of the problem. So what we must be absolutely unambiguously clear about is that anyone who's so-called pro-life or anti-choice or whatever, what they actually are is anti-women. I can't put too fine a point upon this. Essentially what they're saying is that women are not full human beings, that they're not they're not worthy of being regarded as complete human beings, that they need an element of, if you want to see it positively, taken care of, or sort of paternalistic kind of oversight, or in a worst case, that they are just basically not worthy of rights and therefore kind of need to be overridden and somebody else needs to make decisions for them. So I think we need to kind of, within the campaign movement, I think I'd like us to be more clear about that and more stark about that, so that people actually know what they're talking about. And anyone, and it doesn't matter what gender they themselves are, Nadine Dorris is a prime example, you can be a woman and still be anti-women. But essentially this is an anti-women movement that's taking hold. I come from India, and abortion is actually quite common in India, unfortunately. It's not a pleasant thing for anyone, but ultimately it's a failure of contraception. That's what, unintended pregnancies are. And I don't think, and I don't believe anyone here believes that this should be any more than that. It's a failure of contraception. It's an unintended pregnancy, and no woman should have to pay a penalty for life for that. No man does. There's absolutely no reason why any woman should. Yeah, what can we do about it? I think Kerry kind of nailed it when she said we need to organize. One thing is not to be complacent. Yes, we need to be aware of the problems. I'm shocked by Harriet's numbers, actually, and I hadn't realized that women and men were being criminally prosecuted, that the law was so confusing. So this is a real eye-opener for me. But what I am aware of in my seat is that the current law as it stands, the requirement for 2 medical professionals to say that a woman is, can proceed with a termination of pregnancy definitely takes the power away from the woman and hands it to a professional, to somebody else. And I know in my own practice, at one point in time, we had 3 doctors who were very, very anti, both men and women. They were very anti-abortion. And this woman patient of ours, she, as luck happened, she saw each of them and was kind of pushed away by each of them in very subtle ways, but they wouldn't sign the paperwork and they wouldn't move forward to the abortion provider. I was the 4th doctor she saw, very quick chat. It was clear to me that she knew what she wanted, that there was no confusion, because all that I'm checking as a medical professional is this person going to regret asking for one? That's all I'm interested in, Is she clear in her mind? What are the reasons for her seeking it? And if I'm happy that there won't be any negative consequences for her, I sign, I move forward. So this kind of shocked me and made me realize just how powerless one is as a woman if you're in such a situation. You're totally dependent on these other people to kind of move things forward for you. And it's not like, a medical thing where there could be 2 points of view or anything like that. This is a very straightforward thing. The only point of view that matters is the pregnant woman's. If she wishes to proceed with her pregnancy, she goes ahead. If she doesn't, she doesn't. It's quite simple. So moving on from there, in my region at least, so the commissioning of abortion services has mostly been handed over to the what's the so-called 3rd sector. So BPAS I believe is the majority provider of abortion services in England. I'm not sure about the other nations. And I had a quick look on their website before coming on here, and I think they reckon they provide the vast majority of abortions here. I actually think that's a positive step, because what it did was it took the onus away from general practitioners to sign that initial paperwork. So that situation that I just narrated, where a woman has to get her GP to agree to it, has just been removed. So someone wants an abortion, they can ring BPAS directly, and that's how the commissioning is in our region. And I believe every region is slightly different because of the way the NHS has been splintered. But BPAS then take over, which I think is a much better way to do things. They provide the counselling, the initial chat, do the paperwork, and do whatever's needed. It's only if the woman consents that a GP gets told about the termination. Otherwise, it's just kept within themselves, which I think is right and proper. They also provide contraceptive services, which again is something that's very important. And I don't think the availability of contraception is good enough in England. That's something we should be pushing for. We need to make it as easy as possible for women and men to access contraception. And the education that we provide to our teenagers at schools needs to be much more frank and open. The final thing I want to say is it sort of worries me how cagey people are in speaking up for abortion. There's still a slight taboo around it. There's still an embarrassment, in spite of the fact that almost every woman, I think, will know someone who has had an abortion. So it's a bit like periods, It's a female thing. It's sort of something to be slightly ashamed of, not spoken about, buried, kept away from sight. And worse than periods in the sense that because of the very strong so-called pro-life lobby in America, and inevitably here as well, there's a stigma and a blame attached to wanting or needing an abortion. And I think one of the ways we can counter that is just by being more open about it, by making sure that services are visible, that that everybody knows without having to look too hard where to get help if they need it.
I think one of the things, Pallavi, that I was reading about just recently was when people were talking about, like, in the States right now, there's that incident with the 10-year-old girl who was pregnant, and the doctor who sent her out of state to try and get her an abortion is the one being prosecuted because he wasn't allowed to aid her. And certainly the courts in that country, in that state, were saying she should go through with the pregnancy, which of course, she's a 10-year-old. This is just ludicrous. I then looked into, is this a one-off? And it so isn't, There's so many, very many underage girls. But, we talk about sometimes, so this is what I was reading, is we talk about when we say, the right to choose, we talk about the extremes, incest, rape, underage, and things like that. But reality is we shouldn't even be having to define, really, why we need our abortions. But we just do. And this isn't the business of the law. This is the business of the healthcare provider. And I think you had that exactly right when you said this is a health issue, and how do we then, and I think, things like, finding Harriet's statistics, working with Kerry, and finding out how we can separate abortion from being a legal thing to something to do with the law, to being just a healthcare thing. Is there, anything that you can see that, how would we separate that? I suppose it's similar to the drugs issue, where we want to separate drugs from being, a dangerous criminal act to accepting that it's a healthcare issue, and how we separate these things. I wouldn't even know where to start, but I certainly know that in my view, that if we could put certainly our 3 speakers together into a conversation after this that goes on, and we could maybe work together with you as Green Party women to see what sort of pressure we can apply, as a women's lobby, and see what we can do together. That was really informative, Pallavi. Thank you very much. And it must be such a strain in your job to be up against such narrow-minded views from your peers as well. It must be very challenging.
It's not just that, it's climate change as well. You wouldn't believe how many doctors don't believe in it or don't want to do anything about it.
No.
Honestly.
You just think you guys are the science,
I know, it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult. That's another one altogether.
Yeah. Yes. And the thing is, though, that with attitudes like that, it leads to things like late-term abortion, because they put you off for so long. And certainly in Ireland, where they finally got the right to have an abortion, you're reading about it's actually no point really, because they can't get access. And when they do see someone, they're passed from pillar to post and delayed, that in the end they end up coming out to England for the abortion anyway. So, and as you said, making it later and ever more dangerous. And certainly what Harriet uncovered, for your average teenage girl who doesn't want to tell her parents or her doctor or anyone else and goes online, and admittedly that's dangerous too. You don't know what pills you're getting, but goes online and gets some pills, and she's at risk of life in prison because of some law in 1861. It's just a crazy world. Yeah. All 3 speakers, you were amazing, and it was an incredible combination. And it does give me a great deal of hope, though, that with minds like yours and the things that you're discovering and finding out and willing to go through, that we could do something to have some impact. We're going to open this up now to questions. And I think Nicole and Nicola, Lucy, some of the committee have been vetting questions. And is there anything come through yet, ladies?
2 very good questions.
Excellent. Are there any in the chat, Nicola, Nicole?
Yes, there's 2 of them.
Okay.
And maybe I could start with the first one from Linda. Yeah? Sorry, you muted, Tina.
Oh, you think, it's not like I don't Zoom very often. So is the question directed at any one of our speakers in particular, or is it a general question?
Well, actually, this one from Linda, I think, is fairly general.
Does Linda want to read it out herself, maybe?
Yeah.
I can see her in the room.
Yeah.
Go, girl.
So, Linda Howbridge, could you read your question then?
Yes, I thought that during lockdown, women, the government said that women could get abortion pills from pharmacists. And does that mean they've somehow broken this ancient law? Or is it only illegal if you get it from an unofficial place like online?
So can I answer that?
Go ahead.
What they did was they said you can get the morning after pill from pharmacists, which is different to getting an abortion pill. The actual laws around abortion haven't changed. A lot of commissioning services have changed it so that women could be treated without being seen in person. They get the pill by post and so on. But that's, again, a regional thing as far as I understand. Kerry might know better.
Could I just clarify something before you go off? Because, again, it's been a long time for me. Is an abortion pill and a morning after pill, so there's a difference between these two types of pill and the type where we get those from?
So the morning after... Yes, sure, do, Kerry. Yep.
Go for it.
I think, Linda, what happened at the beginning of lockdown is the government quite sensibly realised that if people couldn't go outside, there'd be a really sort of difficult situation with abortions. And this is something that abortion rights asked for in 2007, because there's quite a lot of guidance on the Abortion Act that doesn't have to be in law, doesn't have to go through Parliament. It could just be medical regulations. The NHS could decide how it operates the law. It's just that they've been too afraid up until now to do it, and they keep saying that we can only have changes in regulations done through Parliament. But at the beginning of lockdown, it changed the regulations almost overnight to say that telemedicine was allowed, and the law which said you have to have your abortion in person, which in 1967 had to be done in a safe clinic because it was a surgical procedure, but in 2022 it's early medical abortion, so before about 12 weeks. They can be a combination of pills of myfi and myso, I don't know the long names for them. So it could be like 2 pills, or it could be up to sort of 6 pills taken one after the other, sometimes on consecutive days. But now more than half of those who have abortions opt for early medical abortions, and this has gone up massively since lockdown. They did a consultation after they enacted this, because they said that it was for the duration of 2 years or the end of the pandemic, and obviously we don't actually know when the pandemic ended or whether it has yet. So the Welsh government made it permanent, has allowed pills by post telemedicine to be permanent. Then Scotland did, and then England shamefully had to be kind of dragged kicking and screaming by passing policy in Parliament. And the Tories are kind of keep flip-flopping, or they're very uncomfortable about that. But I feel like it's the best thing that's happened for abortion care, since the 67 Act was passed, because just breaks down so many socio-economic barriers for women's access. People who can't use public transport because it's, flaky in rural areas, people who can't get time off work because they have to change their shift patterns. The majority of women who have abortions already have one child already, so they have to get childcare. And it costs money. If they're having to go from a long way away and then go back the next day, it's overnight accommodation, all of those things. So and then domestic violence is a huge thing that people are aware about during the pandemic, and it gives me chills when I hear of healthcare professionals telling me that they have arranged to meet a woman in a supermarket car park to give them a bag of pills and extra pads and all of those things, so that the woman doesn't have to disrupt her day-to-day activities, so that her partner doesn't realize what's going on. And that's what healthcare professionals are doing up and down the country.
That's just heartbreaking, isn't it? Sorry, Linda, go ahead.
So what is it that these poor women have done that has led to them being prosecuted?
In terms of my data, we don't really know. That's part of the issue with it, is, as I say, there's such a breadth of scenarios which could be covered. The 2 women who are in court at the minute are accused of having taken abortion pills after the maximum limit allowed in law, unless the mother's life is at risk, which is 24 weeks. Both those court cases are accused of having taken those after that time. But as the legislation stands, it doesn't matter what stage you are in your pregnancy. It could be well within the 24 weeks limit, but if you haven't met the very strict criteria that's in the 1967 Abortion Act, which is 2 doctors have to say, yes, your health is at risk, we approve this process, and that it's done on an approved premises, then even if you're well within the 24 weeks, it's still non-official abortion, and it's an illegal act.
Harriet, can I ask you, you know, the access, or in fact, all of you, Kerry, Pallavi, is access to abortion pills online, so not through the medical, where they could be at risk of this 1861 law. Is there much access available online? And is there danger and risk with those pills if someone is scared to have to approach their medical professional and so on?
I'll tell you a story about that, because something happened recently. An activist in Glasgow, a student, she's not a stupid woman. She, just because she's young, and where you go for advice is the internet for that generation. So she was pregnant, she didn't want to be. She went online to find out how she could get an abortion. And the only thing that she could find, or the first thing that she could find, was the clinic in Edinburgh, which has aunties outside of it. So it was in the news because it's got aunties outside of it. And she thought that that was her nearest clinic. So she got on a train, went to Edinburgh, and then couldn't get an appointment that day because that's not, you know, they don't do same day appointments, or she couldn't. But they told her, you know, you can go to your GP and get a referral, or you can go to a clinic in Glasgow. And she just didn't realise. So I think it is, there isn't, because of the stigma and the shame about abortion, or because of complacency, we don't talk about it enough. People aren't educated at school about, you know, the basics. So she just didn't know. And I imagine we've heard anecdotally that women who come from maybe Poland, who the way you access abortion in Poland, unfortunately, is you get pills off the internet, and they probably thought that we have anecdotes of people thinking, oh well, it's legal in England, so I'll just go on the internet and do what I always do to get my abortion care, and they don't necessarily realise that if you obtain it not through the sort of medical route, that you could be prosecuted. And I think that's a very real problem, that people don't know, or they don't feel comfortable accessing abortion through the sort of routes that are available to them.
Thank you very much. That was a good, thorough explanation. Nicola, any further questions coming through the chat?
Yes, I've got one. I'll just read the question out. Do you think that part of the anti-abortion movement is to force women to have more children, as the birth rate, fertility rate in the USA is falling? I think one of the speakers did refer to demographics. I wondered if you wanted to enlarge on that.
I think they're concerned that the white population's falling, if I'm honest. But it's always been a kind of preserve of the anti-choice sort of right wing to want to control women's bodies. I think they're, you know, terrified of us having choice. Abortion rights isn't against people having as many children as they like. So it's not necessarily we're not eugenicists or population controllers. We just want to have choice and access. So I can't put my head in. I can't imagine what they actually want or what they're thinking. But there is the way that the funding is set up in the US, and access, where the clinics are, how women get access to abortion, is very racialized in the US.
So you're saying, Kerry, then in a nutshell, this is not so much, I mean, admittedly, there is something on population and fertility and stuff, but you think a great deal of this is just purely down to the determination to control women's bodies. And so it's a power grab rather than a medical or legal or, you know, humanitarian concern, that a lot of this is about that, which I think that if it's ever anywhere more evident than the States, really, because, you know, they make it easy to get a gun and kill people, and yet a woman trying to get control of her life. Because, you know, I was trying to think about this the other day, and I thought, you know, pregnancy isn't just the 9 months, is it? You know, it's your whole lifetime of care for another, you know, and all of that lands on your shoulders. And there were people outside after Roe versus Wade. I remember seeing one couple going, "I'll take your baby," and I thought, you know, that isn't what anyone's looking for. No one's looking to go through that. And then there's the emotional upheaval of the pregnancy in and of itself. You know, have you had, I'm sorry, if there's more questions, I shouldn't keep asking. I'm just so inquisitive, but I have got further questions. But Nicola, sorry, is there more?
Yeah, we've got one from Alison. Alice and Molly, do you have any idea what the position of the three Tory leadership candidates are on abortion? One of them is going to be the Prime Minister.
I'll venture a guess. I think it's not because the Tories are so divided on this issue. If there are, I'm making a bit of an assumption here, but I'm guessing most of the anti-choice kind of people are within that party. I think they're smart enough to keep a low profile on that. Having said that, I don't know that any of them are actually anti-abortion as such. I've not seen any statements, but I haven't researched that particular thing. So
I was just looking on Facebook as we were talking, because I thought that's an interesting question.
right.
Sunak and Liz Truss seem to be in favour of decriminalising further, but Mordaunt is a bit ambiguous. She's the one to watch, I think.
She's been ambiguous in all sorts of things, and she's very hard to pin down, that one.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so further, Nicola?
I've got a question of my own, which was,
Go for it.
I wondered, it's to Harriet really, I just wondered why the police and the CPS actually choose to pursue these. I mean, I do know that they like an easy life. Is it because it's a nice tidy crime and they don't have to go out at night and get, bitten by dogs or something? I don't know. It just seems not a priority in this day and age, really.
I can't say why, to be fair to them, the data that I got from the FOI shows what the ultimate outcome was for these cases. The vast majority, I think only 2 of the 17 that I spoke about ended in a charge. In a fair few occasions, the outcome that police forces have registered is they didn't think it was in the public interest. That's a valid reason the police can select for not pursuing charges, or the CPS might decide that instead of the police. Interesting though, and it's another angle that I'm sort of wanting to look into, is that in a number of scenarios they've chosen outcomes that indicate they had evidential difficulties because the victim wasn't willing to support the prosecution. And quite who constitutes a victim under these laws is beyond me, and I find that quite alarming. Whether that's the fathers of the baby, I'm not quite sure. So I think that's something that needs looking into, because in quite a lot of the cases they haven't taken the case forward apparently just for that reason. So if they are looking for support from somebody else, i.e. a victim, to bring them forward, and I think that's cause for concern.
Was it the case that back when Theresa May, she looked at reviewing the laws and something went wrong and it didn't get carried through? Does anyone know anything about that? About why that didn't happen? Was it simply that we were in the middle of a change of government, she lost her position, that fell off the radar? But certainly we were looking to get rid of the 1861 law and to look into the other laws. Does anyone know anything on that? Maybe Kerry?
So the reason, sorry, could you ask the question again and I'll just get my thoughts together?
It's all right. You can frame it any way you want, but has anyone has there been challenges to the laws and how successful they've been? And I saw something about Theresa May. It was one of quite a strong challenge to the laws, and I thought that was a good thing, even though it's her. But then it didn't progress. I assume that's because she ceased to be in her role. But I wasn't sure about what happened after that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't actually know about that. But Diana Johnson MP has put 2 private member bills about, or 10-minute rule bills to Parliament about decriminalisation, and it's her opportunity to kind of put the case there, and she gets fairly good votes, but sort of doesn't go any further because of the way. I mean, when the 67 Act came through, they had to put it on about 5 times in different ways, just because of the way Parliament works. But the way that Northern Ireland got decriminalisation essentially was a bit of a fluke, because if you remember how much money the Tories gave the DUP, and everyone was really horrified by it, so that they could kind of have a functioning government. The MP Stella Creasy managed to kind of get through decriminalisation, which essentially was just taking the 2 clauses, I think it's 58 and 59, the ones that mention abortion, just removing them from the Offences Against the Person Act, and good job, job done. So they could do that when they wanted to kind of the bigger picture of using the DEP for political ballast. But they can't do it, they haven't motivated themselves to do it in Westminster, or it's a slightly different situation in Scotland, because they don't have the Offences Against the Person Act in Scotland. They have a slightly sort of different setup of common law. So in England and Wales, we've seen with how they kind of fought kicking and screaming to make telemedicine permanent, that there's just some really the Danny Krugers of the world, the Nadine Dorrises, are just really motivated to hold back our rights.
Yeah, on just to add on Theresa May, as far as I had been aware, her involvement was just about whether to pull the 1861 Act from Northern Ireland. I hadn't been aware that she was thinking the same needed to apply to England and Wales, because I think, as Dominic Raab said recently, they consider abortion law a settled matter here. We've got our rights, and that's all fine, based on the 1967 Act.
Wow, astounding. Nicola?
Somebody has asked, what should everyone be doing to ensure that women's reproductive rights aren't eroded further? I mean, I wonder if what Pallavi said about making it normal to talk about having an abortion, because as she said, I know women who've had them, but it's only come up in this sort of context. It isn't just said. And also, not here maybe, but in the US, they're saying, well, they'll come for contraception next. That is absolutely terrifying to me. It's terrifying that you can't have that basic ability to limit how many children you have. So I don't know, do we need to be on the streets? I suppose that's the question. Don't know who it's to.
For a start, it would be good to have details of abortion providers in every female toilet around the country.
Brilliant idea.
And maybe that's something that we should campaign for,
Yeah.
Just make it visible so that nobody has to ask anyone. You can just imagine, a frightened 15-year-old gets a positive pregnancy test, which she's managed to buy off the chemist for £1, and then, peeing her pants because she thinks, my God, what do I do now? Don't tell my parents. I don't want to go to the GP because I don't trust them or don't know them, never been there on my own. What do I do? And if there's a phone number, and if there's something there to say confidential, free advice, you will be listened to. That's all it has to say,
Just a thought on that. What's going on in America right now, I would wonder whether approaching fashion retailers to ask them to do the same thing in cubicles, changing cubicles, would be a PR win for them as well, and sort of coming out on the side of abortion rights with the situation.
Yeah, great idea.
Just want to let everybody know, don't worry about, if you don't catch some things on this. Certainly we'll be keeping the chat, and I'm assuming one of the committee members will take the chat, probably Julia, and we'll take the links and the information that's come through that's really interesting in the chat, and put that in an update when we put out some information in our next newsletter. Also, with regard to calling for action, I do think this is something that, and you can see it with the rest of the committee, that we're very keen to work with all three of you on. And maybe we can look at, looking at raising funds for those changing rooms and toilets for information, and certainly working as a lobby and asking our peers and our MP to actually put this forward for us. So it was just to reassure that, don't worry if you've missed anything, we will try and encapsulate what's come out of this meeting and put it out in a mail to Green Party women members, those signed up to the newsletter. Nicole?
Yeah, well, you've just stolen my.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, two things on a practical level. One is somebody advertised on the chat that there's going to be a counter march on the 3rd of September, presumably in London, against a sort of pro-life kind of march. So that's one for us to advertise. But this idea of actually putting things in toilets to advise people as to what to do, I think that is something really interesting, because we have 305 local parties. And I'm sure most local parties will be quite happy, the women in particular, to take a bunch of little flyers and stick them in the local toilets. So this is a practical thing that we can probably help with by using our network of 4,000 members.
Agreed, Nicole. And perhaps marrying up those local parties, those local Green Party women members, with their local, where they can get abortion advice and family planning, maybe trying to connect those together. But yeah, all brilliant ideas that have come out of this. Nicole or Nicola, there was something in the chat for Green Party women about in India and China. Can somebody read that one out?
Yes,
Yeah.
do you want?
Yeah, you read it, Nicola, because my handwriting.
I mean, we've been seeing it as all positive in choice, but this is putting a slightly different slant on abortion. Wait a minute, let's just scroll it up the screen a bit. In India and China, there is a real problem with sex-selective abortions. How is it ensured that women are not pressurized into those abortions? Is this a bigger problem than infanticide? I mean,
Can I come in on that?
Anybody can, yeah.
Okay, so I've lived in India. So I grew up in India. So I've got a bit of first-hand experience. I think the first assumption there that women are being coerced into this is probably not always true. Women are part of the social climate. And if girls are valued less than boys in a society, the women are not immune to that either. So they go along with that as well. I'm not saying all women, not all the time, for sure. So we've got to bear that in mind. So, I think we should restrict ourselves to saying that we want autonomy for women to decide. There's a separate fight to be had about ensuring that women actually have that autonomy, which is what the question is alluding to, about not being pressured to do something that they perhaps are not wanting to do. But that's going to happen through female education and empowerment, which happens in so many ways. Giving power to women on the political stage, but also on the social side of things, real power. So that goes with economic independence, education, all these sorts of things. So it's a complex issue. I would be reluctant to simplify this. Female abortions are definitely a thing. They are reducing dramatically. As far as I know, I haven't checked the latest figures, but they are going down. I believe the trend will continue as the social advancement of women goes ahead.
I grew up in Hong Kong, and it was certainly a part of the culture that the male children in China and certainly some of it in Hong Kong was felt too, that the male child was an essential and that a female child slightly less so. That was just a strange attitude to go up with, the way you said that sometimes the women are led to believe that too, but that's a cultural pressure. It's not necessarily that we would, given the freedom of thoughts, have reached that conclusion. I'm sure most people wouldn't, but that your cultural pressure from family and just from the way that your society has lived, it's very hard to shake that off. But yeah, it's an interesting contrast that forced abortions as opposed to what we're asking for, which is the right to choose. But again, it's not a different thing. It's the right, as you said, to what happens to our bodies. We need to be the ones choosing that, and the law needs to get its nose out of that, because it's all our choices that should be being considered for health reasons. Yeah. Right. So
can I just say one more thing? I know India and China are headlining in terms of not wanting, female children or whatever. But actually, in a very insidious, milder, and more palatable way, that's exactly what we see in the West as well. Which is why we have this problem today, where women are seen as lesser human beings.
Good point.
And it's time we recognize that. I was actually shocked. I came from India, where I grew up in a middle-class family, and not once in my life had I been discriminated against within my home or within my wider social circle. I grew up expecting to achieve as much as my brother. There was absolutely no bar. I came to the UK and I discovered to my horror that girls are under such severe pressure right from childhood to behave in a girly way, to be these little princesses. You know, you're not allowed to do so many things as a girl here. The expectations are so unreal. I found that, you know, really, really, so I was gobsmacked. So I don't know how many of you can relate to that, but, you know, looking at it.
Totally. You know, who would want to be a girl growing up today when those are the expectations of you and you must be that? And if you don't feel you fit that shape.
No, but this is continuing. This is continuing even today. If you look at all the public schools, the reports that have come out about public schools, the way girls are discriminated against, put down, you know, abused, treated like objects. And I see this in my clinics as well. This is rife across the UK.
It's certainly part of a much broader problem, what we're discussing here. Kerry?
I wanted to come in on that because there was a campaign to try and change the legislation, essentially change the Abortion Act, because they were using the example of sex-selective abortions. And the stats in the UK, at least, didn't tend to bear up, but it had a chilling effect on the medical community. There were, I think, 5 GPs, I think, who now don't practice medicine anymore, who were filmed by a bogus newspaper campaign. They were all Asian, and it was a real pernicious campaign against the Asian community as well. And radiographers were coming out and saying that they didn't want to give women information about their bodies, about what had happened, because they were afraid that they were essentially racially profiling them and saying, because they were anti-choice. These, we call them wedge issues. So these issues that are meant to divide, say, the feminist sort of community or the disability community, they're Trojan horses in most cases. You don't get to change, you can't change sexism in society by reducing the rights of women to abortion. It doesn't work like that. So we campaign quite hard against that. Choice means choice. But I think that there is a right-wing kind of thinker in America who is on record as saying, use things like sex-selective abortion, use disability to divide people, use this salami slicing of time limits. So the antis, Nadine Dorris doesn't want abortion at all, but for her to say, oh, we should go from maybe 24 weeks to 20 weeks is her kind of chipping away at the legislation. Things like let's have compulsory counselling. Counselling's a good thing, right? You know, it ignores the fact that there already is counselling, and one in 5 women that have counselling in BPAS change their mind. So it's not that that's not happening. It's not that that's not happening, but the compulsory element is it infers that women don't know their own minds and they have to have somebody sign it off for them. So I think we just need to be careful around the rhetoric, especially when it's next to abortion, on these things. I know that the Down syndrome community is quite unnerved at being kind of the poster people for pro-choice, anti-choice. It's uncomfortable even amongst disabled activists that are like, why are you pulling one group of us out? So I think that we have to be very careful about how we word our responses to those things, because, you know, if we're not from the South Asian community, if we're not from the disability community, you know, we need to be careful. But then the antis don't care about them.
No, it's just using. It's a horrible thing to use people like that. But I suppose in essence, if we were saying what we are actually fighting for is simply to take everybody else out of the equation and just get down to that one singular person that matters in all this. And that's the woman who is pregnant. And it must be down to what is right for her, because she's the one who's going to go through it. Wow. It's 20 minutes past 8. We have another 10 minutes. So there's time for another question, or if any of our speakers would like to give us something else to add to this, and certainly a call for action at the end. Nicole?
Well, I have a question for Pallavi. You are a Green Party spokesperson on these matters. How much support are you getting from headquarters or GPEX?
With regards to what specifically, Nicole?
Well, resources, campaigns.
Honestly, I haven't asked, so I guess the answer is none. But I've only just been enrolled for a very short time, and I'm still finding my feet. So we're actually engaged in creating a draft policy, which is my big priority at the moment. And I was going to actually ask all of you here if you would be happy for me to put something along the lines of that abortion, provision of abortion is a healthcare issue and needs to be treated as such, that it has no place in criminal law.
Absolutely.
That no woman should be prosecuted for seeking or attempting to have an abortion, that advice and guidance regarding abortion should be freely available to all women. This was kind of roughly what I had in mind. Does that sound reasonable?
That's great, and you can rely on us to give you whatever support you need, I think. Come to us, we can help.
Can I just pick up one point? First of all, I know there were a couple of people who raised their hands earlier. They put them down now, so I don't know if they still had questions or not. I think Joe and Rachel had their hands up, and somebody else whose name I've forgotten. So just want to quickly check.
Yeah, I think my question was supposed to be being put forward, but just today I heard that there was an issue in Northern Ireland with pro-life people lobbying outside abortion, presumably abortion clinics in Northern Ireland, and they're looking at changing the law around protest. And I just wondered if protest outside abortion clinics is a problem in England and Wales.
Who would like? I'm not sure, Kerry. You probably know more about that.
Yeah, there's an organisation called Sister Supporter that is focusing on where the antis turn up outside abortion clinics and using public order PSPOs. Using legislation to essentially say that it's not the appropriate place for that kind of protest, and they're called buffer zones. So putting some buffer zones, which is legislation they have in the US and other places, to limit the impact on those who have to confront them. I feel that antis have just given up on the media. They know that they don't get good press for being anti-choice, and they've given up on trying to change the law, which is what they really want to do. So they're going for the the easy targets and the most vulnerable, and they're sort of standing outside clinics. They wear GoPros and they film people going in and out. They tug on their sleeve, they whisper, calling them mothers and saying, "Don't kill your babies," and they're a nuisance, and nuisance at best, and I think they're disrupting access to healthcare. I think that I understand the activists kind of moves to sort of these legal operations to reduce the harm, and they say themselves they're harm reduction, but I also think there should be a campaign to the health minister to say, why aren't you making sure that women have access to healthcare? Why are you allowing these protesters outside? The same thing's happening in Scotland. It's less easy in Scotland because the abortions happen in NHS settings, so the campaigners have to be outside, whole hospital wings. But the Scottish government is currently engaging in a summit on abortion to try and look at how they resolve some of these issues, and there's a campaign called Back Off Scotland, which is campaigning against clinic protesters. I'm not entirely sure how widespread they are. They operate mainly around Lent, so they have this campaign 40 Days for Life, which is grim. We set up Christians for Choice as a counter to that, because we don't think there's anything that moral about shaming women outside clinics when they're trying to get their healthcare, and also what's moral about forcing a woman to give birth when she's said that she doesn't want to.
Nicola?
Kerry, thanks.
No, I was only going to say that I come from Ealing, and the house that I was actually born in, over the road, is an abortion clinic, and they had protests for years probably, and eventually they dealt with it. So it can be dealt with. So if you have an issue, ask Ealing what they did, because once they took action, it stopped. Yeah, I think they moved them so far away that it was pointless, so they gave up. Yeah.
There is the British Pregnancy Advisory Service have a, I don't know how regularly they update it, but they have a map on their website which shows where around the UK there are clinics that have experienced or do experience regular protests outside their doors. And, you know, it's just looking at the map now, it's sort of right across the UK. And the statistic that they say is that roughly 1 in 4 women who have an abortion in the UK attend a clinic that has weekly or daily protests outside of it. Which is pretty shocking.
Outstanding cruelty as well, that filming the women, tapping them, trying to intimidate them mentally. I mean, when you're already going through something as traumatic as making a decision about your body and about having an abortion, to then be put through that, there's an absolute cruelty to that. There's something in the chat, Raphael Hill, not a question, but it might be of interest to know that it was the Northern Irish Green Party who pushed for safe spaces around abortion clinics, which passed in Stormont. Sadly, the Northern Irish Greens didn't keep their seats in the re-election, and there's in the recent election, and there's a link in there to that information in the chat. But as I said, we will be keeping the contents of chat and putting this together. I think the way we might do it is, because there's been so much information here and quite a lot of work to be done, I would say, that I think Green Party women and Green Party women members would want to get involved in, that we might make a mail out just for this one subject alone and do a few calls to action as well in there. If there's any further questions, we have 5 minutes till we close. Nothing in that case.
One quick point.
You go ahead. I was going to say, by all means, make your points and take the next 5 minutes, speakers, to say what you'd like to say.
I think it would help if we were all actually clear in our messaging and made it clear to everyone that being anti-abortion is equal to being anti-women. So that's one thing. I think that's something we could perhaps use. The other thing is to point out that if you're against abortion, don't have one. It's as simple as that. Nobody is forcing anyone to have an abortion. You know, that point again, I think needs to be made really clearly. If you're against an abortion, don't have one. It's as simple as that, you know, but there's absolutely no need for you to talk about somebody else having an abortion. It's none of your business. You know, that's ultimately what we want to say. But if we can maybe just keep those two things, you know, at the top of any messaging or any discussions that we have, I think it takes a lot of the heat out of the argument as well. To say, great, you're against abortions. That's your view. You're totally entitled to it. Don't have one. And the discussion kind of ends there, really. I can't see what anyone would say to that.
I can't tell you how happy I am that you're in post now, because I think we're just going to be a continuous stream of stuff coming from Green Party women and asking you for help. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Kerry, Harriet, anything to add before I close the meeting and some final words?
Thank you very much for having me. I thought the discussion was really great and people raised thoughtful contributions.
Yes, I thought so too. It was excellent.
Just to say as well, thank you for having me. And you know, I'm at the beginning of an investigative process that hopefully will yield more evidence down the line of the way these laws are being used against women, beyond just the crimes that are reported to police. So, you know, I'll be publishing those as and when I can. Thank you. There's one hand up. Morven, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that actually a woman who's having a miscarriage will also be attending a clinic, or she might be there for some other reason. She's not necessarily there to have an abortion. She could know that her baby that she really wants inside her isn't living anymore. So that makes it even more horrific.
Absolutely. Excellent point. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting now. Thank you very much for those points. Thank you everyone for participating and for the great questions. Thank you to the committee for putting this together. And thank you very much, more than anything, to Pallavi, Harriet and Kerry for being here. It's meetings like this that make me wonder how women don't rule the world. You know, we gave birth to everybody and we seem to have all the right policies and the wisdom. And yet here we are still having to fight for every scrap from the table. It's appalling. And I think that the people in this room need to be the powerhouse behind making sure that changes. Anything to add, Mandy, before we go?
No, I was just going to echo that. Yes, brilliant speakers, and we've got a long way to go. But I think the solidarity between women is always very helpful.
How about the donate button, Tina? remember we said we would ask for some donations. Right, Tina, you've frozen.
We can't do it here.
No?
No, can't do it on Zoom.
Okay, well, we can gently advise people to go on our website and donate, yeah? That's all.
Sorry, I disappeared. I lost the connection. I'm assuming you all filled in while I was away. I don't even know when I ended, but yeah. But yes, so unless I've interrupted anyone, that's it, we're done. That was really rewarding. Thank you so much. And there's so much to be getting on with now. And as I said, look out for a Green Party Women email newsletter coming out in the next couple of weeks, in which case we'll update you on everything that was discussed this evening and actions we'd love you to get involved in the future. And so that's it. Thank you very much for attending, and yeah, good night.